If you're a high performer looking to grow and make an impact, but feeling stuck, underappreciated, and burned out at work, you're in the right place. I'm Melissa Vining, and this is the Job Search for High Performing Misfits podcast. I help high performers leave draining jobs behind, reclaim their careers, and land roles in organizations where they can thrive. Tune in for tips, insights, and inspiration for your journey to fulfilling work that fits you. Hello and welcome back to Job Search for High Performing Misfits. I wanted to come back today and do another solo episode because we are in a very competitive job market. I don't think that's a secret at this point. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about making a career change and going through a job search in this competitive market, because there are certain things that we need to be aware of and we need to really be strategic about when we are in a place where it is an employer's market. So I was recently talking to a client who wanted to make a big career change that involved changing both her role and her industry. So she was coming from teaching and administrative nonprofit type work, and she wanted to move into cybersecurity. But during our conversation, she also told me that she had 2 kids in college and basically needed a paycheck yesterday. So in this example, her goal was a career change, but her priority was financial stability. And in this particular situation, those 2 things were not completely aligned. And this is something that is true for a lot of job seekers. So today, I really want to talk about why your goals and priorities might not always be the same thing, how to evaluate the trade-offs that you're making, and why the idea of having it all is usually not realistic and might actually be keeping you stuck in your career and your job search. So I'm going to dive right into the practical strategies. Whenever you are thinking about making a career change in any type of way, right? It could be any type of pivot. You want to start with your why. What is the actual reason that you want to make this change? So there could be so many different reasons, and I hear a lot of common themes. So the first one could be the financial stability that I mentioned with the client I was talking with. So you might be looking to make more money so you can be more financially stable. Another reason could be job security. So especially right now when we've seen so much disruption in the market and so many changes in certain industries, jobs, kind of disappearing in a lot of ways, there might be a real concern around your role or your industry being able to be stable over the long term. Maybe the jobs that you have done in the past are no longer really a thing anymore. You're not able to find jobs in that space. So that's one of the reasons why it might actually make sense to be changing roles or changing industries. It could be around lifestyle priorities. So this could be something like your commute, the location of your office. It could be that you're looking for remote or hybrid work. We've seen a lot of return to office mandates, obviously, over the past couple of years, and that's causing a lot of people to want to make a change. I worked with a client recently who wanted to make a change just because of the practical commute part of this, right? So she was commuting to another state for work every day. It was taking her like 2 hours of driving each way. And that was not sustainable because she had 2 young kids and she wasn't able to spend time with them. So being able to make a shift so that she could have more of that work-life balance and the lifestyle she was looking for was her top priority. Another one could be physical sustainability. So sometimes I hear from people that they've done a certain job and maybe they loved it, but at this point in their life, they just can't physically do that anymore. So one example that I heard recently was that the person was working in early childhood education, and obviously that can be a very kind of physical job. You're on the floor with the kids, you're doing all of these different things. And at this point, they weren't able to do that anymore, so they needed to shift away from it. Another reason why I often hear people want to make a change is for professional growth. So that could mean advancement. You want to be able to move up the ladder in your space. It could be not necessarily moving up into a new role, but it could be more along the lines of skills development. You want to be able to gain new skills or to do some sort of professional development that will help you just continue learning and continue growing in what you can do. A big one that I hear from a lot of people is around the work environment. So this is where we get into the toxic cultures and maybe the work style misalignment. So you work in a very specific way, and the company or the organization you're working for or the team you're working in works in conflict with that. So I can talk about this from my own perspective. I work very independently. I'm going to go and I'm going to create programming. I'm going to do, all of these things. And the best way for me to do that is by myself. And there are certain environments where it's much more collaborative and you have to actually go into these projects as a team and work on them together. And for me, I'm not able to contribute as well in that type of environment. So that could be one of those, work style misalignments. Or in terms of the culture, you could be, in a culture that prioritizes a certain thing, or they're working towards certain types of goals that are in conflict with your own. Another reason why sometimes people want to make a change is for personal engagement. So maybe you're using your energy in a certain way at work that's actually draining you instead of giving you energy. Maybe you're finding that you're not able to use your strengths and it's causing you to kind of feel disengaged in your work. Maybe it's that you've done this work for so long that the interest and the novelty of it has kind of depleted over time and you're just ready for a change. You want something new and exciting just because you feel like you're not engaged anymore with that work. It could be also for personal fulfillment reasons. So maybe you just want to contribute in a certain way so that you can have a feeling of fulfillment. I know this was true for me when I was teaching music because that was something that was very fulfilling to me, but I wasn't able to do it at a scale that felt like I was really making a contribution. So I was working with a small number of students and they were really benefiting from our work together, but it never felt like it was enough for me. So when I came into the career coaching space and I had this much bigger audience and I felt like I was able to make a bigger impact on many people, that made a huge difference for my feelings of personal fulfillment. So all of those things can be really valid reasons to want to make a change. And maybe there's something I didn't even mention that comes to mind for you. And this is where I want you to start really thinking about what is your why? Why are you actually making this change? From there, we have to kind of differentiate your goal versus your priorities, because this is not necessarily always going to be the same or always going to be in alignment. So I talked about that client at the beginning of this episode that was looking to make this change, and that was really her long-term goal. It was to be able to change from the education and administrative area into cybersecurity. But her priority right now at this point in her life is to find work as soon as possible because she needs to be able to support her kids that are in college. So the priority does not necessarily line up with the goal. And in that example, we also need to recognize that it's harder to make a big career change versus staying in the same role in the same industry. So if your goal is to make this change as fast as possible so that you can have that financial stability, that might be conflicting with the longer term goal of making this big change. So you might sometimes have to think about the goal as a long-term goal and come up with a new short-term goal that better aligns with your current priorities. So in a tight labor market, making the smallest change possible is generally going to be the best strategy. So in this example with this client who's trying to make essentially multiple changes at once, we want to break this down into smaller pieces. So maybe that means as a first step, you're finding a new role in the same industry that allows you to use more of the skills that you would use when you look at the long-term goal. Or maybe it's a similar role that you're already doing, but in a new industry. So you're not changing necessarily role and industry at the same time. You could also potentially explore the possibility of staying in the same role and the same industry for the sake of finding work as soon as possible, if that really is the priority. Okay, I have another example here. So I was working with another client who, on first glance, his goal was to find a fully remote job because he was working in tech, and his current company was mandating return to office full time. And we see this with a lot of companies, and especially a lot of the larger companies that essentially can do it just because they're the giants, right? They can do it because they know that even if people leave, other people are waiting and they will have a full workforce anyway. So with those larger companies, they are often saying everyone needs to come back to the office full time. And that was the case for this client that I was working with. And he really didn't want to have to do that because he also has a 1-year-old child and he wanted to be able to help take care of him and be there for him rather than, using his time in the office, especially when the company wasn't really intentional about supporting their why are we bringing you back into the office. A lot of times we hear companies say things like, we want you to come in so you can collaborate more with the team. And in his case, they were saying that, but the team was fully distributed around the world. So a lot of the team was even, in Ireland, and he's thinking, why would I go into the office so I can then Zoom with my team in Ireland? It's not matching up. So that kind of lack of clarity in terms of their why also causes a red flag for a lot of job seekers and a lot of employees. So in this case, his initial driver was for remote work. His goal was to be able to find a job that would allow him to be fully remote. However, his actual priority was salary. So he wanted to be able to increase his salary to support his growing family and to support, what he needed in his life. So he ended up going through the job search process and he got an offer that would increase his base salary by 37%. 37%. That's a huge increase. That's way more than you would get staying in, one job, one company, even with potential increases over time, right? This is one of those reasons why people say it's so important to move companies every so often, because you have more opportunity to get a big increase like that. So that was not even including bonuses and other benefits, 37% in the base salary. However, the trade-off in that particular opportunity was that it was also 5 days a week in the office. And so for him, in that moment, we had to talk through what is the real priority right now, because initially he felt that it was about the remote work, but when it really came down to it, it really was about the salary. So the point of this story is that there are always going to be trade-offs. And this is why it's important to think not only about your goals, but also about your priorities and checking to see, are your goals and your priorities in alignment? And if not, let's reevaluate and let's think about this strategically. I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea that we can have it all. We can find the perfect dream job that meets everything that we're looking for. But in reality, that's usually not the case. So you have to really decide what's most important and build your strategy around that. And it's not to say that you might not get several things on the list, right? I often talk about listing out all of the things that are important to you in your next job and your next company. And you're going to use that list to actually measure potential opportunities against. So you're looking for opportunities that meet the requirements on the list, but recognizing that there will be some trade-offs and you will have to prioritize the most important things. So once you do understand your priorities, You also have to recognize that there are going to be many ways to get there. So this is an interesting thing that I think a lot of the times we don't think about. But if you have identified priorities, let's say it is financial, right? You want to be able to increase your salary. There are several different types of pivots you can make that could get you to that goal. So you could potentially change companies. So in the case of the client I was talking about, he is changing companies, and that alone is allowing him to increase his salary by 37%. So he is not even changing roles. He is not changing levels. He is not really changing industries. That one small change in company allows him to meet that goal. Same idea, you could keep everything else the same and you could change your level, and that would allow you to potentially increase the salary. You could change your industry. Same thing. You could increase your salary just by changing your industry alone, or by changing the type of company or type of employer you are doing this job for. So I can use myself as an example because it's an easy one. You could be a career coach in a nonprofit, in like a workforce development space. You could be a career coach in an education, like a higher education space. You could be a career coach in your own individual company or just, freelance type work. Or you could do it in a space where a company hires kind of more executive coaches and career coaches to help develop their internal talent pipelines. So there are a lot of different types of environments where you could do it. And in each one of those environments, the salary is going to look very different. You can apply this to any of the other potential whys that you have for making the change. So if it's something like the lifestyle, and you're looking for a remote job, or you're looking for less commute time or whatever it is, you could change your company and that could potentially get you there. You could change your role, you could change your industry. With something like professional growth or the environment, you could potentially change any of those factors and you could get to that place where you are, able to continue growing, or you are able to get into an environment that better aligns with your work style and the culture that you're looking for. So for each one of those different types of changes, company, level, role, industry, there are going to be things that are easier, right? Like if we look at the salary part, you're changing level, it's pretty obvious you're going to go up in salary. If you're changing role, you could potentially get a higher salary, but it's going to be less likely. So again, you want to think about your priorities and what kind of change you can make to get there, recognizing that changing one factor at a time is going to be the most realistic approach, especially in a competitive job market. The other thing that sometimes we don't talk about enough, and especially in the career coaching space, because we are here to help people in their job search, is the idea that you could potentially stay in your current job and make an adjustment there to get you to be better aligned with your priorities right now. So last season, I did an episode with Demir Bentley called Winning the Job Search. And this was one of my favorite episodes because it really actually changed my mindset around job searching as a high-performing misfit. When we started the conversation, I thought we were going to talk about how to run a really efficient and effective job search. And immediately after I asked him the first question, he started saying something along the lines of, you might not necessarily need to leave your job. Before you do, you want to think about these things and you want to try these strategies. And that completely caught me off guard because I was like, wow, maybe you can actually get to your goal without changing everything, without leaving your job completely, without throwing everything away. So you might find that you need to work on, for example, setting boundaries or creating new systems for yourself or adjusting parts of your role. Or maybe you move to a different team or different department within your current company. So there are a lot of different kind of changes that you can make within what you have to see if you can reframe things so that it actually does work for you. So in that episode, Demir introduced the idea of the opportunity that's in front of you in that moment when you decide you want to leave your current job, and using it as what he called a fertile ground for making adjustments that might actually make it work for you. Worst case situation, you try it and it still doesn't work, and then you leave, which you had already decided you wanted to do anyway. So the risk with that strategy is actually very small. So I highly recommend going back and listening to that episode if you have not listened to it, because it really will change your mindset around the whole job search, and especially when it feels like you might be running away from something, because a lot of times as a high-performing misfit, there's something that's causing friction that's making you feel like you need to get away. And if you can actually make a change either in your own work or in the environment or in the team or how you're communicating and collaborating or whatever it is, it might actually start to work for you. So if you're feeling frustrated with your job search right now, I want to encourage you to do a quick audit. Think about, is your current strategy built around your long-term goal or your immediate priority? If they don't align, it's time to get creative. So ask yourself, what is the smallest shift I can make to support my priorities right now? Remember, as you're thinking this through, trade-offs are not failures. They are strategic choices. So if you are spending all your time chasing the perfect job, that might actually be what's keeping you stuck in your career. Sometimes the best move isn't the perfect one. It's the one that actually works for your life right now. If you love this podcast, be sure to hit subscribe, leave me a review, and share it with a friend so we can help more high-performing misfits find work they love. See you next time.